Hey cool people, do you like beat 'em ups? I sure do. It's actually one of my favorite game genres from back in the day since they were always my go-to game to rent when my cousin came over for the weekend. They were just so easy to pick up and have fun with. Plus we could both play at the same time, which, believe it or not, wasn't all that common in games back then. Anyway, today I wanted to throw out a selection of beat 'em ups on the Super NES that I think are either underrated or that you may have missed out on. So let's start with a game based on one of my favorite movies from the early 90s. Batman Returns for the Super NES is obviously based on the hugely successful movie of the same name, and thus has been turned into your standard 16-bit brawler. This would usually be a recipe for a mid-at-best Super NES game, but thankfully Konami's the developer at the helm of this one, so you end up with a pretty damn solid beat-em-up with some of the best graphics on the Super NES. The gameplay's pretty basic, but it feels good. Moving Mr. Bat and beating the hell out of every horrific clown that comes onto the screen is entertaining enough, with some of the most brutal Batman beatdowns ever captured in video game form. If you've ever wanted to absolutely demolish a bunch of clowns and circus people with Batman, then this is your game. Speaking of those evil circus people, the enemy variety ain't too bad either, but you're still going to be seeing a lot of repeat clowns in every level doing the same thing over and over, with very few special enemies to break up the monotony. And that's generally the worst issue with Batman Returns. It just kind of gets repetitive. It does at least try to mix every other level up with a more side-scrolling type level, but there's only so much you can do here. It definitely doesn't help that this is a single-player only beat-em-up, and that really only amplifies said tedium. If only Konami could have worked Catwoman in as a second player, and this would have easily been one of the best brawlers on the Super NES. But that still didn't stop me from renting this several times as a kid. It's a damn solid beat-em-up that looks incredible and follows the movie way closer than you'd ever expect from a beat-em-up, something that I definitely appreciated as a fan of the movie back then. Overall, you could do a lot worse on the Super NES as a brawler fan. Just get ready to fight a lot of clowns by yourself. Legend is a little-known beat-em-up from 1993 that I happened to rent one day from a tanning salon that had a video rental section. Yes, a world like this did exist at one point. I did this solely based on how good the game looked on the back of the box, and usually that's a horrible mistake to make. Legend though really wasn't a complete mistake though. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not great, but I've always enjoyed how it felt to play. You play as a medieval warrior with a huge sword, and it does a great job of making you feel like just that. Your movement's slow and your attacks aren't much faster, but hitting enemies with your attack felt powerful, which is helped by most enemies only needing a couple of hits to defeat. You also get this super satisfying back attack where if you press backwards while attacking, your character will swing around to the other side with a devastating attack that knocks everyone on their ass. It just feels so damn good. The rest of the game, however, is pretty average. It does at least look good, but once you get over the graphics and smacking enemies from behind with your sword, you're left with very little else. And the lack of enemy variety and super cheap bosses don't help matters much either. This one is also brutally hard, even on easy, which is actually the default setting for the game, so that should tell you something right there. It is at least 2 players simultaneous though, but even with a friend, it's just a bit too punishing to be fun for very long. Alien vs. Predator for the Super NES has always lived underneath the shadow of the Capcom arcade game of the same name. In fact, most of the reviews I've seen of this game is usually saying just how much worse it is than Capcom's beat-em-up classic. And while that is indeed true, Alien vs. Predator for the Super NES actually came out a full year before Capcom's game even hit arcades. And while it's certainly not the most technically sound or fun brawler on the Super NES, I really don't get how much hate it gets. The biggest hurdle for me is just simply getting over how aggressively ugly this game is, but there's definitely some fun to be had here if you play it for more than just a few minutes. The actual fighting and movement can feel a bit stiff, but charging up your Predator laser is the way to go, as it only drains your power if you overcharge it. Otherwise, you can just spam it at will. Timing the charge and getting off a shot that takes multiple enemies down is actually pretty satisfying. And laying waste to an entire screen with an overcharge when you need it isn't too shabby either. There are definitely far worse beat-em-ups on the Super NES. Trust me, I've played many of them. And I went into this one expecting a truly awful game. But honestly, it's not too bad. If you can get past the sheer ugliness of the game and being yet another single-player only beat-em-up, you may find yourself enjoying this alien brawler more than you expected. Well, what do you guys think so far? See anything that you actually might like? I guess I'll actually be sacrificed for not hating Aliens vs. Predator, but I didn't think it was that bad, honestly. I just think it's cool to hate on certain games without ever actually playing them, I guess. Anyway, let's get back to it with a game that not too many people played when it originally came out. Final Fight 3 came out of the Super NES back in 1995, and unfortunately just never got the attention that it deserved. Final Fight 3 is an excellent brawler, and easily the best Final Fight on the Super NES. Guy and Hagar are your two returning characters, with Lucia and Dean being the two newcomers. Of course, you get two-player simultaneous play here as well, but one interesting option that I haven't really seen in other brawlers is to let the computer control a second character. So if you're like me and have no friends to play with, the AI can pick up the slack. That's actually what you're seeing here in this video. Unfortunately, friendly fire is on by default, which makes it far too easy to do damage to your partner, so I suggest turning that off in the options if you're playing with the AI, or if you're lucky enough, another person. Running around and beating the hell out of everyone in your way feels really good here too. Characters move fast with some fun dash and jumping attacks to close gaps quickly with, which is always important in a game like this. Final Fight 3 also introduces Street Fighter-like special moves for every character that require quarter circle moves and the like to execute them. Working these moves into standard combos can make for some great variety in your encounters, allowing you to experiment with different moves in different situations. Unfortunately, none really seem to make that big of a difference in the overall gameplay, but they're still fun to play around with. And speaking of variety, Final Fight 3 probably has the best variety in both enemies and scenes than just about any brawler on the console. Enemies cycle in and out regularly and combine with different types to make each wave of enemies have their own challenges to overcome. Stages also change up on a regular basis, sometimes within just a couple of screens, which makes the game feel like it's moving even faster than it already is. Final Fight 3 does have a few minor issues though, mainly being the game's unfortunate amount of slowdown if you're playing with two players. It's not terrible, but it's definitely enough to make gameplay chug at times. But I guess that was the trade-off for having so many different types of enemies on the screen at once. Beyond that though, I can't think of too much to say negatively about this one. You could argue that it's a bit short and that the new characters are fairly meh, but overall this is a great Super NES brawler. If you happen to miss out on this one due to it coming out so late in the console's lifespan, do yourself a favor and get back to the mean streets of Metro City. Capcom also released Captain Commando in 1995 as well, and man, I don't know if this was the B team at Capcom or what, but compared to Final Fight 3, this one definitely feels like the lesser game. Captain Commando is based off Capcom's arcade game of the same name, which is an excellent beat-em-up. Unfortunately, the Super NES conversion isn't as good. Well, Captain Commando definitely has some positives carried over from the arcade, like these ridiculous character designs featuring both a mummy and a baby controlling a mech. There's also some fun stages like a circus where you do battle in a big top surrounded by enemy thugs, and a level where you're surfing across a seaport while chasing a mad scientist that had just unleashed a giant monster onto you. I just wish the graphics could have been a little bit better, as the colorful, well-animated art from the arcade is replaced with this, and this ain't very impressive. Unfortunately, playing all of that is mostly a middling experience as well. This is definitely more of a sluggish beat-em-up with your basic attacks and jump attacks to push you forward. You do at least get a dash, but what's the point of a dash when it's nearly as slow as the walking animation? Thankfully, those stages I mentioned before are super short, so the slower gameplay never really starts to wear before things change up. About the best thing I can say about Captain Commando is that it's inoffensive. It's a functional port of a much better arcade game, but if you're wanting some ridiculous Super NES brawler action, I guess this ain't too bad. It's just, go play the arcade game instead if you can. Sonic Blastman for the Super NES is one of the more unique superheroes on the console. I mean, just look at this guy. And keep in mind that an actual human brain came up with this character, which makes this game far more of a think piece than it actually probably should be. Unfortunately, his ridiculous design is probably the best part of the entire game, as the rest of it is a pretty standard brawler. Playing as a crazed superhero definitely has its perks though, with a moveset bordering on the extreme side to say the least. Sonic Blastman can grab enemies and throw them around the screen in hilarious fashion, but even with moves that would kill any normal person instantly, you'll find these guys getting up over and over again, which just makes these stages drag on for what seems like an eternity. Even worse, the overall movement of Sonic Blastman and everything else is pretty sluggish, which just makes the game feel even slower. At least there's a fun bonus stage at the end of every level that has you saving civilians in extreme situations, as any superhero should, but it's still not enough to break up the monotony. Overall, Sonic Blastman isn't terrible, but this is definitely a beat-em-up that desperately needs a second player to break up the tedious enemies and overly long stages. Though if you want a good laugh for a few minutes at the sheer ridiculousness of Sonic Blastman himself, this may be worth a look. Sonic Blastman 2, however, pretty much solves every problem that the original game had. First off, you'll notice that you now have a two-player simultaneous option, which instantly makes the game more fun. You've also got 3 whole superheroes to pick from this time, but thankfully Sonic Blastman is back, complete with his iconic Sonic Blast hits. The gameplay has also been massively improved. The sluggishness from the original is gone, with characters moving and attacking much faster overall. But if that's not enough, you now get a dash that can be combined with your attacks, and even a roll that allows you to get behind enemies. These two moves combined with the faster overall gameplay make Sonic Blastman 2 feel like a completely different game. The stages can still be a little long, but the tedium from the first is almost completely gone here, replaced with fast-paced, brawling fun. Seriously, this is one of the best playing Super NES beat-em-ups on the system, and if you happen to miss out on this one due to its incredibly limited release, then this is definitely one worth playing today if you're a fan of beat-em-ups at all. Highly recommended, Sonic tits and all. And that's going to do it for this batch of Super NES beat-em-ups. There's far more that I could have thrown in here, but maybe we'll save those for a future video. What about you guys though? Got any favorite 16-bit beat-em-ups that not too many people played? Or maybe an underappreciated one that just doesn't get enough love? Well, let me know and I'll throw your best answers in for the next beat-em-up video. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon with yet another mega block of reviews.